Healthcare workers were able to apologize for the incident and create a process to prevent a reoccurrence. When appropriate, patients were offered timely and fair compensation without having to go through legal action. That led to an unprecedented agreement last summer between Massachusetts Medical Society, the Massachusetts Bar Association, and the Massachusetts Association of Trial Lawyers. We all agreed on medical apology language that was eventually written into the state's sweeping healthcare reform bill signed in August. Interested in what we are now calling the Communications, Apology, and Resolution Approach, nicknamed CARE, which I think is a better acronym than the other one, continues to grow. At the AMA Nationals Advocacy Conference, there were many of us from the Massachusetts Medical Society there. It was in Washington, D.C. in March. We shared the CARE approach with members of the Massachusetts congressional delegation, including the new U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who's very interested in this project. We have much more work to do in educating our fellow physicians and our patients about the benefits of medical disclosure and resolution. The Alliance's effort these past years have placed Massachusetts at the forefront of medical liability reform, and we congratulate you. Now I'd like to hand the program over to Dr. Alan Woodward, who is a past president of the Medical Society, and from our perspective at the Medical Society, one of the greatest proponents of this project. Alan, would you like to take over?
Good morning. I want to welcome you here today, but also remind you that just 1 week ago, at this moment, this building, the city of Waltham, most of the Metro West area, and Boston were all in lockdown. The bombings at the Marathon were an assault on our citizens, our traditions, and our sense of security and well-being. But the extraordinary response from all quarters has helped restore our faith and the healthcare system's ability to meet the needs of the nearly 200 injured, many critically, has gained accolades from around the world. For not a single patient succumbed that was not killed in the initial blast, despite innumerable horrific wounds. This is a remarkable testament to our EMS system, to our hospitals, and all those that provided care, as well as to our commitment in this state to healthcare planning and emergency preparedness, also at the regional, local, and institutional levels. So as our thoughts are with the hundreds of direct victims and the innumerable indirect victims of this incomprehensible act of ruthless inhumanity, let us commit ourselves and our efforts here today to further improve the safety and humanity of our healthcare system to best meet the needs of our patients and the citizens of our Commonwealth. Thank you. So I'm really here to talk to you about the efforts we're making to transform the medical liability system in Massachusetts. And my role is to give you some of the background and talk about the accomplishments in the implementation phase over the last 12 to 18 months, and then some really current information on efforts we're making. And then you can see from your agenda, we'll go through a sequence of presentations and then open up for about 45 minutes of questions prior to the lunch hour. So starting with background, we had pursued tort reform in Massachusetts when I was president in '05, but felt that ultimately tort reform was not going to address all of the failings of the current system, which I'll articulate. So we started looking for alternatives to classic tort reform and established a task force here to look at the alternatives. We selected disclosure, apology, and offer as the best alternative and looked at the evidence and advantages of same. Then once we had determined where we wanted to get to as an endpoint, we sought a ARC planning grant to develop a roadmap for Massachusetts to move us forward. So starting with the failings of the current system, and I will point out that most of these can't be addressed, or many of them, by classic tort reform. First of all, for patients, we know that the system is unfair and that a small minority of avoidably injured patients are compensated. The average time to an award through our court system is 5.5 years. We know jury awards vary by 40-fold for similar fact patterns. We know that patients get less than a third of what physicians pay in premiums for medical liability. We also know it's very isolating for patients when there's an adverse event. And in this current system, patients rarely get an apology. And you're going to hear more about that, and we know that that's a critical shortcoming. For physicians, particularly in high-risk specialties, premiums are extremely burdensome. Physicians and all practitioners live with a stress that they can never make a single bad decision, or it can have tremendous impact on their psychic and professional well-being. We know that when practitioners are sued, that their depression rate, their divorce rate, their suicide rate, their sudden death rates, and their myocardial infarction rates all go up in a statistically significant fashion. We know that from our workforce study that practitioners are modifying practice, avoiding high-risk patients and avoiding high-risk procedures as a result of the liability system, and that this liability system motivates physicians to practice defensive medicine. So if you look at the healthcare system as a whole, the current system compromises patient safety. It compromises the distribution and well-being of our workforce, and subsequently access to care. And it drives practitioners to practice defensive medicine, which drives up healthcare costs and compromises the ability to insure or fully insure our population. So what we said as we got into the discussion of bending this healthcare cost curve, and you can see that in Massachusetts, as is true in all states and across the country, that the per capita healthcare expenditures are rising 2 to 3 times as fast as either per capita GDP, wages and salaries, or consumer price index. So what we've said, if you're going to get serious about healthcare costs, you need to address the drivers of overuse of resources. And if you view at the peak there that that's optimalist care, what I will call optimalist care, the highest quality at a moderate cost, we need to look at all of those that are forcing physicians or motivating physicians to practice what I will call maximalist care there on the right. And we think that defensive medicine, from our own study and multiple other studies, is one of the major drivers of excess use of resources. And you can see there are many others, and you can add to that list. But there are multiple studies of defensive medicine that have suggested it's as high as 20 or 25%, or suggested it's as low as 2%. But that study actually looked at the impact of comprehensive tort reform. And comprehensive tort reform, although it mitigates the rate of rise of premiums, does not address the fundamental fear issue which drives defensive medicine. So what we've said is if we're going to get serious about healthcare costs, we need to deal with a system which is driving defensive medicine. The result, our conclusion, was that, as Lucian has articulately said, the current system is an impediment to patient safety improvement, as Michelle has said, for competence, deterrence, corrective justice, etc. For all criteria, the current system gets lower failing grades. And our conclusion is that the current system is unduly onerous for patients and providers and undermines our healthcare system as a whole. So when we looked at the alternatives for reform, nobody wants to deny people access to the tort system, but can't there be an approach that's available prior to getting into litigation? A system that is fair and efficient and reliable and just and accountable, and supports patient safety improvement and reduces the fear that drives defensive medicine. So when we considered the alternatives, and again, we had a task force, but also I happened to be involved in a commission that was a roundtable that was convened in Chicago by the Joint Commission, and it brought together patients and patient advocates and patient safety experts and insurers and defense and plaintiff attorneys. And there were about 35 of us, and we had multiple meetings, but at the end of the first meeting, we said, we don't just want tort reform. If we're going to deal with the patient safety side of this equation, we need to look at an alternative. We came up with 20-plus recommendations, did a press release in Washington, and you can pick up this document on the Joint Commission website if you wish. But one of the options that became, to me, to have clear advantages was disclosure, apology, and offer. And as Dick started to mention, what is entailed in having a disclosure and apology and offer model is that you implement a baseline culture of safety at every healthcare enterprise. capable of doing a thorough analysis when there's an adverse outcome, and implementing changes and improvements to prevent a recurrence. That the findings of that process should be disclosed to the patient and the impact on their health, and what you're doing to prevent recurrence. If it's an avoidable injury, there should be an appropriate and sincere apology, and if warranted, timely and fair compensation without having to resort to litigation. And if you disagree on the amount of compensation, that should go to mediation or a form of alternative dispute resolution, so that most of these cases should and can be resolved before you resort to the tort system. The principles as articulated by Rick Boothman are fairly straightforward. To compensate patients quickly and fairly when unreasonable care causes injuries, but if the care is reasonable or did not adversely affect the clinical outcome, then you support the caregivers and the organization vigorously. So this is not no-fault insurance, but you should learn from every adverse event and the focus should be on reducing recurrences and patient injuries. The evidence when we looked at it in making our decision in 2007 was really limited pretty much to the University of Michigan. For Rick, who you're going to hear from earlier, had started this in 2001. That year they had 262 new claims and more than 300 open cases. 6 years later, they had 73 new claims. Last year, he tells me it was 63, and less than 80 open cases. The average case resolution time dropped 60%. The cost of managing each case dropped 60%. They stopped buying reinsurance. They reduced their reserves from $72 million to under $20 million, and they put those funds back, rather than just reducing premiums for physicians, they put that money back into patient safety improvement efforts to further reduce the number of new incidents. Their court cases have been reduced by more than 90%. Rick now tells me they're litigating on average, less than one case per year. And they provide for their practitioners unlimited coverage, not 1 million, 2 million, 3, 5, or 3, 6, 5, 10, but unlimited coverage with lower premiums. But the proof that the people working in this environment are comfortable with this as a just culture and a means to improve patient safety is their incident reporting had gone from about 2,000 a year to about 20,000 a year. And it has changed the culture and reduced the fear. And when I was out there this past November, meeting as they do every month with their Medical Liability Review Committee, one of the OBs told me, we no longer teach our residents how to practice defensive medicine. We teach them an entirely different model, how to focus on safe medicine. So what we're talking about here is a fundamental transformation of the system, and we think it has multiple advantages. Our current system, as we know, is very reactive. It's very adversarial. It's the wall of silence. It's the culture of secrecy. People tend to deny and minimize their participation often in finding root causes. The systems tend to blame individuals. Both patients and providers are isolated when something goes wrong, and it's a fear-based system which drives defensive medicine. And really what we're talking about now is a proactive approach where doctors and nurses and others identify problems, advocate for patients when something goes wrong, where there's full disclosure and transparency for the patients. And most importantly, one of the major components, that there's apology. And we know from Aaron Lazar's book and others that apology is therapeutic for both sides. For providers, it helps them deal with the grief, and for patients, it helps them deal with the anger and get over the anger so they can move on. But the focus, instead of blaming individuals, becomes the just culture and focusing on system repair to prevent recurrence. And instead of isolating both patients and providers, as the current system does, and I'd advocate that you all read the article, Guilty, Afraid, and Alone, which is on our website by Sigal Bell and Tom Del Banco. It provides supportive assistance to all of the victims and maintains the trust between providers and patients and allows then for providers to feel comfortable practicing evidence-based medicine. So having identified the endpoint we wanted to achieve, our query was, how do we get there? And so we, along with Ken Sands as the principal investigator and a team that you see on the right there from BI, and those of us from MMS, and Michelle Mello from the Harvard School of Public Health, along with Rick, we applied for a one-year, $300,000 planning grant from ARC in their medical liability and patient safety demonstration project program. And we were awarded the grant. Our goals were to identify the barriers to this type of model in Massachusetts, develop appropriate strategies to overcome those barriers, and from those strategies, develop a roadmap that would allow us to move forward. And also, we, because it was a federal grant, were asked to look at the ability to export such a model to other states. Our approach was to do semi-structured, in-person interviews of the most knowledgeable individuals in the key constituencies across the state. We recorded those interviews. The transcripts were excerpted. They were coded by theme and analyzed at the Harvard School of Public Health. And then from the strategies that were revealed for each of the impediments, we cultivated a roadmap based on the feasibility, importance, and time frame of those various strategies. Once we had developed a roadmap, we circulated it back to all of the interviewees and then presented it in this room to about 150 healthcare experts to get additional input. The main barriers that we are identified are here, and again, we've included in your handout the executive summary of this roadmap, but a couple to call your attention to are that charitable immunity law was a big issue, physician discomfort with disclosure, attorneys' interest in the status quo, the reporting requirements, fairness to patients, and insufficient evidence and supporting legislation were all issues that we recognized we had to deal with. The key points from the roadmap were that we really need education for all of the parties involved in this, and we need leadership from all constituencies. And we need a defined process and working groups to help implement this, as well as enabling legislation if we wanted to achieve broad adoption rapidly. And we need data from Massachusetts that we can disseminate. But the summary findings of the roadmap was, first of all, that there was everyone who was remarkably favorable about the concept and recognized that it was the morally and ethically the right thing to do and had significant positive impact on, or can have significant positive impact on patient safety. And the other thing is nobody had an alternative which they thought was better. The other findings were that the strategies, most of them were feasible, and that the majority of parties that we interviewed were interested in participating in the implementation process. So at that point, we finished our planning process and moved to implementation. And this is really 12 to 18 months ago, each of these that I'm going to talk about. And I think it's a significant list of accomplishments for really what is 1 year period. First of all, we secured local funding to help us do this. We developed our alliance, MACRMI, which we're going to talk more about, and our program, the CARE program. We released our roadmap with a media campaign, established our pilot programs in a variety of settings and sites. We enacted the consensus legislation that we were seeking. We launched our website, and we've developed extensive educational programs, materials, and best practices. So first, from the funding perspective, after we finished our 1 year planning grant, we applied for a $3 million 3-year demonstration grant to implement the roadmap. And there had been $50 million defined in the Accountable Care Act, but Congress has failed to appropriate it, even though ARC has told us if they get funding, we're going to be high on the list. They've been very supportive of our program. So instead, having a large group of people that are interested in moving forward, we sought funding from local sources. And I have to say that every entity that we turned to provided funding. So the Risk Management Foundation, CRICO, is funding the efforts at the pilot sites. The insurer at Bay State Health Insurance Company, is funding the pilots at the Bay State sites. We turned to Blue Cross Blue Shield and Harvard and TAP, and they all made contributions, as well as Coveris, formerly ProMutual, and the Medical Society and Reliant, formerly Fallon. So we got adequate funding to get this underway, even though it's a tight budget. We're moving forward. Certainly not the $3 million we had hoped to get from a federal grant. But we've established our coalition, which was the Mass Alliance for Communication and Resolution Following Medical Injury, MACRMI. You can see that the pilots are in there at BI and Bay State. The MMS has multiple functions, one of them the forums like the one here today. The Mass Hospital Association is on board helping with education. The Mass Coalition for Prevention of Medical Errors hosts our website and resource center. The Board of Registration in Medicine we're working with and have been working with, and we're involved from the beginning relative to reporting and dissemination of findings. The MITS group that you're going to hear more from for patient advocacy. The Mass Bar Association recently joined us, and they've been involved from the inception as far as helping us with making sure that our website and our patient education brochures reflect the best interests of the patients from a legal perspective. We've got the Harvard School of Public Health again, Michelle Mello, who are going to help with the assessment at the pilots, and University of Michigan, and Rick is still involved in helping to coach as we implement at these sites. So these are our organizations that are all come together to support the MACRMI Alliance. Again, as Dick mentioned, our program we decided to call the CARE program. We thought disclosure implied sort of one-way communication, and we want two-way open communication. We thought apology was a critical component, and we recognized that making someone whole after a significant injury is broader than just offering financial compensation. It includes meeting their medical needs, their psychosocial needs, as well as their financial needs. And hence we thought that communication, apology, and resolution would be better define our goals. Last April, we released our roadmap. It was picked up by more than 300 media outlets across the country. We then did a subsequent press release just after the governor signed the consensus language. It was a joint press release with the Mass Bar Association, the Mass Academy of Trial Attorneys. That likewise was picked up across the country. And then when we launched our website was our third press release. We've also had multiple articles. This was within the Milbank Quarterly, and this is an article relative to our roadmap, disclosure, apology, and offer programs, stakeholders, views of barriers to and strategies for broad implementation. So that you can pick up from our website. We also recognized that if we wanted, as I mentioned, to accelerate adoption of this, that we needed to have enabling legislation. You don't have to have any legislation to do this, and many entities have been dabbling with it without legislation. But we recognize that there's certain components and certain legislative protections that can help adoption. So we started working about in October, a year and a half ago, with Mass Academy of Trial Attorneys and the Mass Bar Association to come up with consensus language, which we ultimately agreed on the day before the House released their bill last April. And the consensus language, including 4 components, was a 6-month pre-litigation resolution period, time to go through this. If a patient goes to an attorney, it's in essence a notice period to go through this process, a care process, before you end up in litigation. We said we all want to be looking at the same set of documents and doing a root cause analysis or a liability assessment, so it's the sharing of all pertinent medical records. It provides strong apology protection unless you, as a provider, directly contradict yourself subsequently on a major component of testimony. And it provides guidelines for full disclosure when there is a significant complication for a patient as a result of a mistake or error. Also included in that bill, in the payment reform legislation relative to liability, but not part of the consensus, was a prejudgment interest reduction from what had been T+4 down to T+2, and an increase on the charitable immunity cap from $20,000 to $100,000. Also not mentioned here is there were provisions in the bill that both the Board of Registration of Nursing and the Board of Registration of Medicine had the obligation to train providers on the disclosure, apology, and offer. So this was signed back in August, took effect in November, and we think is going to have a major positive benefit on this process. The pilot sites, which you're really going to hear about from Ken, have been established at 6 sites across the Commonwealth at this point and are enrolling patients as of December 1st. And I will say that's really where the hard work is being done, where the rubber meets the road. This past January, we launched our website. It's www.macrmi.info, and if you haven't looked at it, I hope you'll spend time on it. In fact, it just won an award for its for the comprehensive nature and the ease of use of the website. but it's laid out for patients with information, with articles, with FAQs, likewise for both providers, both clinicians and administrators. It has an extensive resource library and links to a host of other organizations and documents that people can pick up from across the country. There's a blog and a newsletter and a calendar and numerous other functions. So please take a few minutes at some point and look at this website. And that was part of our planning grant, was the thought of establishing a comprehensive resource center that could be used by anybody across the country and would be maintained with current information. So to bring to closure, I want to just talk about a few updates of things that are going on as we speak that we can't quite list as completed as accomplishments at this point, but that we're addressing. And one of them is the impediment that physicians are inhibited or feel concerned about participating in this type of approach because of the reporting requirements, both to the National Practitioner Data Bank and the Board of Registration in Medicine, as payments are reported to both of those entities. And this is an ongoing process. We know because of our statutes, the way they're set up, that in essence we are blaming individuals often for systems failures. And the physician is the one who's the deep pocket and for whom the payment is, on behalf of whom the payment is made for system errors. So that's an inhibition, and we've started a discussion. In fact, we have a conference call this coming week with Health and Human in DC with Health and Human Services, with HRSA, and the National Practitioner Data Bank. And we've started discussions with the Board of Registration here in the state, and we'll be doing a presentation on reporting requirements and assessing whether those we can facilitate or obviate some of the angst either through a regulatory process or whether we need to resort to legislation. Other updates are that only 3 weeks after our governor signed our bill in Massachusetts, Governor Kitzhaber in Oregon released a draft bill, a draft of a bill, last fall, and actually I was asked to go out and present with Governor Kitzhaber to the Oregon Medical Association in October. That bill was introduced in January. I went out there again to do a little education, and several others, Linda Kinney and others have been involved, but the governor signed that bill about 3 weeks ago in towards the end of March. And now other states are pursuing this concept of statewide dissemination of this. The Oregon model is very comprehensive and has a state oversight board, but Utah, we understand, has just gotten a CMMI grant to do a statewide implementation there, and we're getting inquiries from multiple other states. The other thing I wanted to let you know is we've been well aware that many organizations in Massachusetts have been dabbling with this approach for several years. The South Coast Group, Leahy, obviously BI and Bay State, but the Fallon Clinic, now Reliant, has been doing this since about late 2006, and actually had invited Rick out when they launched their program at that point. And they just have provided some data to us, which is not, has multiple factors involved, but they've noticed as they resolved, and they expected a 3-year lag to resolve the existing suits, but since that point, over the last 3 years, they've noted a significant decline in the number of suits, although claims have slightly bumped up or up and down, and that's not unexpected. The point is that the number of suits, the cases that go to court, has dropped significantly. So in conclusion, we think this approach has multiple benefits. We think it's the morally and ethically right approach. We also think it's the smart thing to do. First and foremost, it's the smart thing to do for patients. And I will remind you that you're all going to be patients one day. And you really have to think about your experience. If something were to go wrong with your care or the care of a member of your family, would you like the current system where there's a culture of secrecy and you need to pursue litigation often to get information, or do you think a kinder and friendlier alternative of disclosure, apology, and offer would better suit your needs? And I think most people will choose the latter. For patient safety, we know it's the right thing to do. And while the bar will absolutely point out that some cases come to light as a result of litigation, and there's no denying of that, we also know it represses many other cases and the kinds of incident reports and near misses information that we can learn from. So it's clearly the right thing to do for patient safety. And the current system for providers compromises their satisfaction with practice. And we know that the institutions that have implemented this, and Rick is going to talk about the cultural change at University of Michigan, have seen that this provides a real recruitment and retention advantage because people would much rather practice in an environment where there's a just culture and there's not the fear of retribution and individual blame. And we think for hospitals, particularly as we get into accountable care organizations, that those organizations should be accountable for their care and open and transparent about their failings and their efforts to improve and prevent recurrences. And finally, if we're looking at the affordability of healthcare for all of us, and we really want to be serious about bending that curve, we think that this model has significant merit. So that's a lot of benefits, and we're hoping that this program and all of our other efforts will accelerate the implementation of this type of model. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ken Sands, who I've already mentioned a couple of times. Ken is the Senior Vice President of Healthcare Quality at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and an Associate Professor of Medicine at the Harvard Medical School. Ken, as I mentioned, was the principal investigator on our ARC planning grant and has been a committed and insightful advocate and leader of our efforts to implement the CARE initiative in Massachusetts. He'll be speaking to you today about the CARE pilot experience, including the processes and progress the pilot sites have made to date in the implementation process. And this, as I mentioned, is really where the hard work has been occurring, and we appreciate his leadership on this, along with Evan Benjamin and many others who you're going to hear from later. Thank you.
I'm set. Yeah. Sorry, pointer is this the pointer? Good, okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. So the roadmap really laid out a couple of different missions. One was to create a resource for anyone who wants to be moving down this pathway, patients, providers, organizations, and the manifestation of that is the MACRMI website, which has really built out to be a very robust resource, and I invite you all to peruse the different options that are there, materials that are there for all those different communities. The other piece of work outlined in the roadmap was to really begin moving towards implementation, and we saw that as a pilot, and the pilot has two roles. The pilot is to establish how this can be done in a number of institutions, and doing that in a format that it can quickly be spread to additional institutions, and at the same time do that to a level where we can study it and understand it and write up the results of that experience so that others can learn from it in a scientific fashion as well. So that's what we have been pursuing, and I'm going to give you some of the details of that. So here are the pilot sites, and we have 6 institutions that are part of 2 healthcare systems. There's one mistake in the slide here, in that Bay State, as we all know, is a teaching hospital, so that should be a yes. In fact, the largest teaching hospital in our set of institutions, but what we did was we structured this involving all the hospitals in the BID system at the time we began, as well as the hospitals in the Bay State system. And what this has done is it's given us geographic diversity. We've represented a couple of different parts of the state. We have a lot of diversity in size of institutions. You can see everywhere from 31 beds to 716 beds. We have inner city settings as well as community settings. And within these different hospitals, we have a variety of different malpractice coverage models. We have a single captive, owned captive system, which is the Bay State Medical Center system. We have the shared captive model, which is the model that Beth Israel Deaconess operates under, where BIDMC receives its malpractice coverage from the CRICO Risk Management Foundation, which is a shared captive among all the Harvard teaching hospitals. And then within the smaller community hospitals, some of these are covered by the parent system, some of the physicians in these organizations, and some of them are covered by the commercial malpractice insurance market, such as Coveris. And so we have a variety of different models within this that we are able to study by having this number of hospitals. And what I'm going to walk you through is the path that we've taken to care implementation, and we are continuing to promote a new terminology, communication apology and resolution, which we're hoping will take hold more broadly than in our own institutions as the best way to describe this process. But I'm going to walk you through these different steps that we've taken as part of care implementation in our institutions, beginning with taking stock of the current processes and patient safety structures in each of our organizations. I think it's important to realize that we have not deployed massive new resources in any of these organizations in order to be implementing care. We have effectively refit our internal current risk management systems to be working to these aims. Each institution has put some project management support in place to support the implementation. So that's effectively one additional FTE in the BIDMC system, one additional FTE in the Bay State system. But other than that, this process is moving forward by using existing hospital resources that have been responsible for the patient safety and risk management functions within these organizations. So we determined what processes were already in place for dealing with adverse events and their compatibility with using the CARE program. We worked with the existing frontline risk and patient safety staff to determine how they felt about the CARE program and how we could build that into the current workforce. So that was the way things moved forward. And we identified the common elements and processes among all sites that work together from that commonality. So what we've actually done has been, and it's been a great exercise, and these hospitals come together on a monthly basis. We exchange ideas about how we've done our work, and I would say that even independent of the goals of the CARE process, it's been extremely instructive for those of us that have been participating in it to understand how patient safety and risk management occurs in our different organizations. Reviewed how care has happened in those facilities that are ahead of us, and there are institutions that are well ahead of us in putting these kinds of programs in place. For example, the University of Michigan, who we have Rick Boothman here. We've heard from him in the past, and we're continuing to use Rick as a key resource in understanding how we can be implementing similar programs. University of Washington is helping with a national collaborative, and we talk with them on a regular basis. And we've been watching Stanford and the results of their Pearl program very carefully, and we'll be hearing from Jeff Driver about some of the details of how their program has worked, and that has helped to inform us as well. Our goal was to determine what pieces of existing work integrate well into the systems that we have in place and meet the needs that are unique to the Massachusetts medical liability environment. Again, our goal is to put something in place that can be rapidly disseminated. We're not trying to do something that does not provide a model for others. So the next step was to develop the algorithms outlining the care process and to select events that are appropriate for the care process. And this is where a lot of the robust discussion occurred as we came together as a bunch of different organizations. Things go wrong in hospitals. There's lots of events. Some are relatively small events that can be resolved quickly and completely. Others are much more complex. And so what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the CARE program? Things can go wrong where the care was very reasonable and all would agree with that. Things can go wrong where things can be very clearly not reasonable, and things can go wrong where there can be a healthy disagreement about those things. And so we had to come together in how we were going to decide what's in, what's out, what goes through a process, and what doesn't. So we've developed a couple of algorithms. One is a filter for defining what is a care case, and that's used to determine whether an adverse event case should go through the full care process, where it actually goes forward. And then the full care process that will be followed if a case is selected as a care case is the care protocol. And what I'm going to do is walk you through these algorithms. And again, we've developed these to guide our own thinking. It's helped us be sure that we're talking about the same things when we're talking among institutions. And it's also going to be very helpful as we move into the research phase of this, because again, our goal is to study the behavior. So let me just walk you through how this works. So this is our process for defining whether something is a care case. Is this something that's going to be subjected to the full care process? So an adverse event occurs, and in all cases, we're saying that there's always an effort on early service recovery. So we're not saying that something needs a complicated review in order to step forward and do the right thing for patients. So that's always going to happen. Our goal is to always see patient safety alerted, and a lot of our education processes has been around making sure that our departments of patient safety know about as many cases as possible. That's a key part of it. I hear people flipping into their folders, and these algorithms are in people's folders if they want to look at them. And they're on the website as well. Yeah. So you can find them. On the website. Excuse me. They were in my folder apparently, and nobody else's. We're saving paper, but these are in the public domain, and you can find them afterwards. So don't feel like you have to be rapidly making boxes on your blank pieces of paper. So there's going to be a communication as early as possible with the patient. Here's what we currently understand about your event, and we encourage sequential communications with patients. Here's what we understand about things as we currently know them. We will tell you more as we know more. But again, this process is not about not communicating until you have full understanding, and we have institutional policies to guide exactly how that happens. And then there's going to be an internal investigation, as all our institutions do. We have internal processes for looking at patient safety events. Sometimes that will involve an external review if you're trying to understand what happened. And that review is meant to ask a couple of questions. Was standard of care met, or was care reasonable, might be another way of saying this. If the answer to that is yes, then you go over here. And another question is, are we hearing about this case as a litigation notice? So there's another way that a case can come in, which is we didn't capture it through our own internal systems, but we received notice from outside our system, notice of a claim, in which case it goes to patient safety. We do our own internal investigation again, and here you are in here. Did this case originate as a litigation notice? No. Then there's a communication to patients that this thing happened. Standard of care was met, however, and so we're explaining to you, and there's always an explanation to patients about what happened. This we call outcome F. Let's say standard of care was not felt to be met under internal review. And I would say this is actually yes or no or unclear, would send things down this way. Was the patient significantly harmed due to the event? And we have definitions of significant harm, which actually map to, many of you would be familiar with the MACRMI scale in terms of harm. We use something that looks similar to F-level harm, prolonged hospitalization, required hospitalization, with some additions and modifications to that to be more inclusive. And again, these are materials that can be made available. But we have a relatively inclusive definition of harm here, where we go to initiating the care protocol. And then a lot of communication occurs around making sure that chiefs of services are aware, department heads are aware, involved providers are aware. So here's what becomes a care case, is when you get down to here, based on these filters, meant to capture everything that happens internally and also notifications that you get from the outside. So if the internal investigation determines that the standard of care was not met or was not clearly met, and the unmet standard caused significant harm, the case moves to the care protocol. Anything that's a pre-litigation notice automatically moves to the protocol. And then here's the care protocol. So again, if it's a litigation notice, it comes right in. We've set things up to realize that in some cases we're going to lose contact with the patient. We have communication with the patient and communication with our insurers. So the care process is something we are doing together with a lot of coordination with our malpractice insurers, who have sat with us, helped us create these algorithms, and are working together with us as things work through this phase. So insurer is reviewing the case with access to patient records and hospital materials. It can be the case that there may be some disagreement about the initial assessment. That's sometimes requires some custom work. We haven't had this case yet, but we've represented it on the diagram. And then there's an assessment of what is the appropriate allocation, lessons learned, disseminated, begin any patient safety improvements, scheduling of a meeting with the patient, advising patients that they have right to counsel, which is something that we have scripted right into the process. And then there would be an initial meeting with the patient to go through the process of full communication, apology, resolution, perhaps subsequent meetings. And this can result in either the patient not desiring compensation, that there's an offer accepted and a release signed around further action, final offer rejected and no further response. We don't hear from the patient, final offer rejected, and litigation occurs. So we have these outlined. So again, for purposes of understanding the numbers, everything in the end is going to fall into one of these bins. Our timeline for moving through these steps are, again, our expectation is that patients are alerted when there's an adverse event in a very prompt time frame, that internal investigation to determine whether something is a care case occurs within a couple of weeks. If it is a care case, the initial response action is occurring within a couple of months internal to the organization, and then the process of insurer review, contact with the patient, getting to resolution is a process that results in a final disposition within the time frame of 3 to 6 months. This is what we've learned from talking to those of us who've led the way, is a reasonable time frame for getting these done, and certainly is a significant improvement over the process through the tort system of 5 to 7 years. So that's our pathways. We've worked hard to develop unified adverse event policies in each of our institutions. So we have revised the institutional policies at each of our sites so that those policies, standard institutional practice, matches the care process that we've put into place. So these are now sort of baked into hospital process, and we've made sure that systems are reliable for reporting adverse events. We've done a lot around the education agenda. We've all been in front of our physician leadership groups, our medical executive committees, our boards of directors, our PCAT committees, to make sure everyone is on board with this process, and that we have created the right buy-in at the institutional leadership level. We all launched back in December, and that launch involved presentation materials for clinicians, leadership, and staff, creating reference resources. At BIDMC, we created badge cards, which describe the care process, which provides one page number that can be called if you have an adverse event and you feel you need advice on how to move forward with a case and the evaluation, whether it's a care case or not. We have had people review support materials, and we've all been to numerous M&M meetings, grand rounds, and the like, in order to make sure that the education is as complete as possible. And finally, we've moved into assessment strategy, which is where we are getting a lot of help from Michelle Mello at the School of Public Health, as well as Alan Kachalia from Brigham and Women's Hospital. We're going to be looking at volume of events, financial outcomes, overall costs, clinician experience, and patient experience as part of what we would like to do. Some of these things are sort of under design with a placeholder in hopes that we get the additional funding to be able to pursue all of these goals. So that's the whole process. In the post-launch phase, we continue to define best practice. Education goes forward. We have mechanisms for just-in-time support and coaching around difficult disclosures, and that is, at my institution anyways, a single number that can be called. More formalized peer support mechanisms for supporting clinicians who are participating in this process, and making sure that this information is available as part of patient materials as well. So here's just a little bit of kind of up-to-date numbers on where we are at BIDMC in terms of the care process. So we've had 39 events that have kind of come in at that filter level. This is since December, where we've done that assessment of whether there's potential significant harm, or did they come in as a pre-litigation notice, or are we unsure whether standard of care is met. 35 have sorted over here, where they did not filter into the care protocol. They were investigated, felt either to not be significant harm or harm and care was met, and there was communications to the patient, support was given, but these did not go into the protocol. We have 4 cases over here that sorted into the care protocol and are moving through the process, and next year when we have our second annual meeting, we'll be able to tell you more about how those have gone through the process, but we're obviously early on in our own experience here. So that's where we are currently. I know there's questions out there, but we're doing that as part of the panel once we get through the next